very happy to at least see that more are coming here to this series that we just have started, A God Worth Knowing. Before we start and before we pray, I would just like to summarize a little bit what we have learned so far in the other lessons that we have had. The first lesson, we asked ourselves the question, can we trust the Bible? And there we saw that God gave us a challenge to see if we actually can trust His word. He gave us a challenge. He didn't just expect us to believe that whatever He says is true. So He gave the challenge that He could say what will happen in the future, and when we can see that it has happened, we might believe. And we looked upon a great prophecy, a timeline of the great empires of the world. And then afterwards, the second lesson that we had, we started to look into more of the prophecies of the main character of the Bible, which is Jesus. And we saw, I think we looked at least on 8 to 10 prophecies, very specific prophecies that was foretelling the life of Christ and how He would suffer, how He would die and resurrect, and many other things of His life. And I do believe that even though it was only 8-10, it was just marvelous to see that this has been predicted hundreds and even thousands years before Jesus even existed. And that makes the Bible really worth trusting. But the question comes then, and this is what we'll talk about today. If God exists, and He's so good as the Bible describes, where does all this suffering come from? All this evil, all this pain? Why does it exist? And this is the question we want to answer today. But before we start, I hope we can bow our heads for a word of prayer. Father in heaven, we want to thank You so much that we have the opportunity to gather here and ask difficult questions so that we might also get great answers from You, because we humans, we are struggling a lot with looking upon this world and seeing what is happening, and we really need hope. And I really ask that You might provide us with answers today so that we might see that You truly are a good God, and that we can understand why You let all of these things happen in this world. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. So this question, I think it's maybe one of the points that people attack the God of the Bible the most upon. That, yeah, if you trust in a loving God, where does all this evil come from? Why are there starving children? Why are all of these wars? Why do they exist? And all this injustice and selfish people, just they can do whatever it seems in this planet. I think we have experienced enough pain only in our own lives, and there is even more pain out in the world. And the question comes then, if God is so good, and if He's all-powerful, why does He allow it, or why doesn't He just stop it? And I'm happy that the Bible actually asks this question to God. We can actually see in a passage of the Bible when this question is put forth. God, if You are so good, why do we have so much evil around us? Do you know where we can find this question when this question is put forth to God? God, if You're so good, why is there so much evil? It's a fascinating parable that Jesus told in Matthew chapter 13. He explained a parable. We'll first read a parable and then we'll see what it means. But I hope that you will pay attention to the very story of the parable so that we can think about it when we read the explanation later. So let us go to Matthew chapter 13. Matthew chapter 13, and we will read from verse 24 and to 27. The parable of the wheat and the tare. So Matthew chapter 13, verse 24 to 27. There we read, and pay attention if you can see this question somewhere here in this verse, but I will show it to you later if you can't catch it the first time. Here it says, another parable put he forth unto them, saying, The kingdom of heaven is likened unto a man which sowed good seed in his field. What kind of seed? It was good seed, remember this. But while men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat, and went his way. But when the blade was sprung up and brought forth fruit, then appeared the tares also. So the servants of the householders came and said unto him, Sir, didst not thou sow good seed in thy field? From whence then had it tares? So, first of all, we see this parable about somebody sowing good seed and an enemy comes, puts in bad seed, and then we get this question, didn't you only sow good seed? Where does all this bad seed come from? Let us continue reading in verse 28. He said unto them, An enemy had done this. Remember, the one who sowed the seed here, he doesn't take any responsibility for the tares or the bad seed that is in the ground. He says, An enemy has done this. The servant said unto him, Wilt thou then that we go and gather them up? But he said, Nay, lest while ye gather up the tares, you root up also the wheat with them. Here comes a sentence I really want you to remember. And I think this will give a lot of understanding to the answer why evil still exists. Let both grow together until the harvest. And in the time of the harvest, I will say to the reapers, Gather ye together first the tares, and bind them in bundles to burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn. This is the parable that Jesus said. And many of the parables he never gave any explanation to. Maybe they were too obvious and they understood them, I don't know. But for some reasons, the disciples, they were very curious, particularly about this parable. Because later, probably in the evening, they come to him and he asked them the question, like, what does this parable mean? The disciples wanted to know. It seemed like they didn't fully grasp what this parable meant. So Jesus, he explains this later, what it means in verse 37, and we'll read from there. Jesus says here, He answered and said unto them, He that soweth the good seed is the Son of Man. So as you see, the story was that somebody sowed good seed, and then an enemy came, sowed bad seed there, or tares, and later the question was that should we just reap all of this or try to take out the tares? But the answer was to let it wait for some time. But here we can see, who is it that sows the good seed?
Son of Man.
The Son of Man, Jesus, exactly. The field is the world. So you can imagine the whole world then is the field. The field is the whole world. The good seed are the children of the kingdom, but the tares are the children of the wicked one, or the enemy, as we will see. The enemy that sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the world, and the reapers are the angels. Let us stop there. So, do we have answer to what everything represents in this parable? We have the Creator, who created a good world, only good seed, right? But then an enemy comes and plants tares among them, right? Yeah. And do you remember the question? The question came from the servants. Of course, the humans can also ask this question, but in this parable, the reapers or the servants, who do they represent?
Angels.
They are angels. What question did they ask the master or the husbandman? They asked him, let us go back. And we'll see there in verse 27. This is the question the reapers are asking. The servants, the angels. So the servants of the householder came and said unto him, Sir, didst not thou sow good seed in thy field? From whence then had it tares? can you see that this is the question when they're asking God, if you're a good God and you created only good things, how does it come that evil exists? Even angels have questions. We have questions, but I find it fascinating that even the angels have this question. And then later we'll see what will happen to all of these tares. In verse 40, as you remember, the tares and the wheat were supposed to grow together. As therefore the tares are gathered and burned in the fire, so shall it be in the end of this world. So the harvest later will be the end of the world. The Son of Man shall send forth his angels, and they shall gather out of his kingdom all things that offend, and them which do iniquity. So let's just stop there. Do you remember the answer that the sower said, or the husbandman, when they asked this question? Should we take out the tares now? What they're basically asking, should we destroy the wicked one now? But the answer was,
let it grow together.
Exactly. Let it grow together, because if you try to separate it now, you might not see the difference of what is a tare and what is a wheat. So now when we have both tares and wheat, we have to give it time to let it grow, to mature, and then comes the harvest. We'll see why this is important. But today, I want to study a little bit about who this enemy is, because the answer here is that the enemy has done this. My question is, who is this enemy? How did he come about? And what is his motives? I mean, many Christians, they know that we are in a spiritual warfare. But many of us do not know, what is this warfare about? What is at stake? We might know that, yeah, there's some kind of good and there's some evil, but what is the foundation of this whole controversy, this whole cosmic conflict that we will see? So today I want to study a little bit of the origins of how sin came about and about the enemy here. What was he called? The devil, right? We will study. First of all, Jesus, he said something interesting when he sent out his 70 disciples. They were astonished that even the demons, and we'll see who the demons are later in the study, but they were obeying them at their name. And Jesus, he said something interesting after they come back and they're happy that even the devils are subject to us. Here they are saying, and the 70 returned again with joy, saying, Lord, even devils are subject unto us through thy name. And Jesus says here something interesting in verse 18. He says, and he said unto them, I beheld. Is this past, present, or future? Beheld? This is the past, right? So it means a time ago. I beheld Satan as lightning fall from heaven. So Jesus, he explains in this context, you shouldn't be surprised that the devils are subject to you, because I saw when Satan was cast out from heaven, or how he fell from heaven. And remember this word. It will be repeated throughout this lesson and the verses that we will read. Fall from heaven, how he fell. We actually find the origin of how he fell in Isaiah chapter 14 and verse 12. If we go to Isaiah chapter 14 and verse 12, we will read here about the origin of this enemy and how he came about. Maybe some of you know that the devil's name before he became Satan was actually Lucifer. And this we find here in Isaiah chapter 14 verse 12 to 14. And if you read the whole chapter, you will realize that yes, it is talking about the king of Babylon, but here God is describing the power behind the Babylon, the very evil that is inspiring him. Because we can see many of these descriptions, they cannot be a description of the king of Babylon. It just wouldn't make sense. And we'll see this later when we read another chapter about the fall of Lucifer. So in verse 12 here, Isaiah chapter 14, verse 12, we read a question, and someone is astonished. The question is, "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning?" The verse begins here with, "How could you fall?" It's like, how could it happen? Didn't we see just, this was the description of Jesus. He saw Satan fall from heaven like a lightning. Again, the word here, fallen from heaven, or Lucifer, which actually means the bringer of light, or the morning star. Son of the morning, how art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? We have this great question here. How could it happen? How could evil come about? What actually happened? Let us read in verse 13. There it says, "For thou hast said in thine heart." If we just stop there, how do you say things to your heart? What does this mean? Exactly, you're thinking them. And I want you to pay attention to this, because this really shows the power of thoughts. Can you believe that this great conflict that we're having today, all this suffering, started with a thought? What was he thinking? What he's thinking here, he says, "I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High." Is there a word here repeating a lot? I. Seems like Lucifer really had an eye problem. And I want to break down each piece, what it means here. The first thing he says, "I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God." My question to you is, who are the stars of God? Who do you think it might be? I might give you the answer now, but I will prove it later also. Who are the stars of God? They're actually the angels. We'll show this for sure later when we get to Revelation. But he wants to exalt his throne above the stars of God. He wants to raise his throne above the angels. What does a throne represent? What do you do from a throne? Exactly, you rule. It's a symbol of from where you rule your kingdom. What he's saying is that I want to exalt my throne above God's throne. He's basically saying that I want to rule instead of God. But my question is, what is it that he wants to replace? What is the throne of God according to Scripture? What is the foundation of the throne of God? How does God rule? Let us turn to a psalm, but keep a finger if you have a Bible, and keep a finger in Isaiah chapter 14, because now we want to turn to the Psalms. In Psalms, we read about what is the foundation of the throne of God. In Psalms chapter 97 and verse 2, we read about what God's throne represents, and then we can know what Lucifer wanted to replace, what kind of government he wanted to replace. So in Psalms chapter 97 and verse 2, we read, "Clouds and darkness are round about him. Righteousness and judgment are the habitation of his throne." There are two things that we read here about the throne of God. What is the foundation of the throne of God, or the habitation? What is it? Righteousness and judgment. Or justice, we can even say. My question to you is, righteousness, we know it's a good thing, but what is righteousness? What is actually righteousness? Let us just turn some chapters later in Psalms where we find that what righteousness is. In Psalms 119 and verse 172. There we read, "My tongue shall speak of thy word, for all thy commandments are righteousness." So all the commandments of God are righteousness. And it makes sense that from a throne, or when you govern a kingdom, when you govern a territory, you need to have certain laws, foundation to govern it, right? And based upon how the kings make the laws, that decides if they're a good king or not, right? And here we can see that the law of God is the foundation of his throne, right? And this is what Satan wants to, or Lucifer wants to replace. He wants to replace the rulership of God. But I want to go a little bit deeper. We know that righteousness are his commandments now, right? But what are his commandments based upon? What is the foundation of the law of God? Did I hear it? Louder? Love. Let us go to Romans chapter 13 and verse 9 to 10. There we read about the commandments of God. Paul there is giving a description of the 10 commandments here when he says, "For this, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness, thou shalt not covet, and if there be any other commandment, it is briefly comprehended in this saying, namely, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Love worketh no ill to his neighbor, therefore love is the fulfilling of the law." The foundation of God's throne or God's kingdom is love. And these commandments, these are the ones that Lucifer are opposing. And I want to go even a little bit deeper, because sometimes when we talk about love, we talk about it so generally. Oh, I love this, I love ice cream. You know, it kind of takes away the real power of what love actually means. What is love? According to Scripture, do we have a description of how love works? We have a whole chapter dedicated to this. In 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 4 to 7. And I don't know if you ever thought about it, but read these verses in the context of this is the government of God. This is what his kingdom is based upon. Here we read that love suffereth long and is kind. Love envieth not. Love vaunteth not itself, is not puffed up, does not behave itself unseemly, seeketh not her own, is not easily provoked, thinketh no evil, rejoiceth not in iniquity, but rejoiceth in the truth, beareth all things, believeth all things, hopeth all things, endureth all things. This is a beautiful description of love and the government of God. But God's, if I could summarize this whole chapter in just a couple of sentences, I would say God's government is about you first, not me. Always put someone else's unselfish love here. Self-sacrificing love is the foundation of God's kingdom. But as we can see, this is what Lucifer is opposing. If we go back to Isaiah chapter 14 here, and we read, now we understand a little bit better what Lucifer wanted to replace. He wanted to replace the government of God, his laws, and he was attacking God's character. It says here that I will sit also upon the mount of congregation in the sides of the north. What is this all talking about? That he wants to sit upon the mount of congregation. And remember this word again, mountain. We will see this later in a chapter when we describe the fall of Lucifer. Who sits on the mount of congregation in the sides of the north? God. Let us go to a psalm and see if we can confirm this. In Psalms chapter 48 and verse 1 and 2, we read about who lives in the north. Here it says that great is the Lord, and greatly to be praised in the city of our God, in the mountain of his holiness. Beautiful for situation, the joy of the whole earth is Mount Zion, on the sides of the north, the city of the great King. Here we have a representation that where God sits, where he rules, is on the sides of the north, on Mount Zion. That is where the great city of God is. We see this again, that he wants to ascend there. He wants to be in charge of the government instead. And remember, these are all thoughts to a beginning. He's only thinking these things. But I want to go a little bit deeper and see more of how this fall came about. How was he before? Was he always the enemy of God? As we could see, he fell, right? He fell from heaven. That means that he must have stood up for him. He must have fallen from something. So we have a greater description when we go to Ezekiel chapter 28, a more detailed description of the fall of Lucifer there. So in Ezekiel chapter 28 and verse 13 and 14, we'll read about, again, the context is another king here, but the power behind him, and we'll see this several times in the book of, in the Bible, how Satan uses different nations to do his will. But here, it's actually Lucifer who is described again, not the king of Tyre completely, but he had the character of the fallen angel, Lucifer. Ezekiel 28, verse 13 and 14, we read here. Thou hast been in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was thy covering. And here comes a lot of stones. I don't think we have to read all of them. And we read onward in that the workmanship of thy tabrets and of thy pipes were prepared in thee in the day that thou was what? Created. Means that he was created at some point. That is important for us to understand. Let us read here in verse 14. Thou art the anointed cherub that covereth, and I have set thee so. Thou wast upon the holy mountain of God. Thou hast walked up and down in the midst of the stones of fire. This is what I love about the Bible. You have to catch the details. This is just so amazing. Here it says that thou art the anointed cherub that covereth. Do you know where this expression is taken from? The cherub that covers, the covering cherub. So, as you said, and as we talked about in the sermon today, that the study of the sanctuary that God has given us, it is of utmost importance. It really reveals to us secrets that we couldn't find out otherwise. This expression is taken from Exodus chapter 25 and verse 20, when we read about a certain furniture. Let us go there. If we go to Exodus chapter 25 and verse 20, there we read, that's the only other place in the Bible where you will find this word, anointed cherub. Covering cherub. Here we read, and the cherubims, again, I forgot to ask, what is a cherubim? Angels. Right, some sort of angel, right? And the cherubims shall stretch forth their wings on high, covering the mercy seat with their wings, and their faces shall look one to another. Towards the mercy seat shall the faces of the cherubims be. This is a picture, and as we studied before, and we will study this message later about the so-called sanctuary or the tabernacle of God, but the purpose of giving this tabernacle was to reveal the secrets of heaven so that men could understand this. There was this ark that was made, the Ark of the Covenant. Do you know what was put inside the Ark of the Covenant? Inside of it? The Ten Commandments were put inside. And upon the top, the lid was called the mercy seat. What do you do on a seat? You sit on it, right? We'll see why that is important. And on the sides of this seat, there are two cherubims, covering cherubims. And what did we read of Lucifer or Satan here? He was the covering cherubim. He was one of the closest angels to God. I would say the closest angel. He was supposed to cover the law, or as we will see, the throne of God. Did you know that the Ark of the Covenant is the actual throne of God? Did you know that? Let us read in Psalms chapter 80, verse 1. Where does God dwell? Where is his so-called seating place, where he sits? Psalms chapter 80 and verse 1. They will read, O shepherds of Israel, thou that leadest Joseph like a flock, thou that dwellest between the cherubims, this is talking about God, thou that dwellest between the cherubims, shine forth. Where does this expression come from, if not of the Ark of the Covenant? You who sit between the cherubims. This was the throne of God. What we are learning here is that Satan, Lucifer, was the angel of cherubim that was closest to the throne of God, at his, if I could say, the right hand of him. But let us read what happened to him. How was he created? Verse 15, we go back to Ezekiel chapter 28, and now we found out what it meant that he was the anointed cherub that covered. And I have said thee so. Thou was upon the holy mountain, again, that's where God rules from Mount Zion, the holy mountain of God. Thou hast walked up and down in the midst of the stones of fire. Now we go to verse 15, because this is starting to get interesting. Thou wast what? What is this word? Perfect. Thou wast perfect in thy ways from the day that thou wast created. So did God create a perfect being? Yes. But, reads on here, till iniquity was found in thee. What is iniquity? It's a bad thing, right? We usually equate it with sin, and it's basically synonyms to sin. What it's saying here, that you are created perfectly. God created a perfect being that chose to sin. Go against God. Let us see how he turned away from God. By the multitude of thy merchandise, they have filled the midst of thee with violence, and thou hast sinned. Therefore I will cast thee, you see again, cast out or fallen, or it comes again. Therefore I will cast thee as profane out of the mountain of God, and I will destroy thee, O covering cherub, from the midst of the stones of fire. You see here that it says that he sinned, right? What is sin? We know it's a bad thing to sin, right? But what is the actual definition, the biblical definition of what sin is? Let us read it from 1 John chapter 3 and 4. Here is the clearest definition that we have of what sin is. Here we read in 1 John chapter 3 and verse 4. Whosoever committeth sin transgresseth also the law. For sin is the transgression of the law. Can you see what, and we saw what the law was based upon. And we see now that Lucifer, he transgressed it. He went against the very law that he was supposed to protect. Because he was the covering cherub. He was above the throne of God there, covering with his wings. And what was on the foundation of the throne of God, or the foundation inside of the Ark of the Covenant? The law of God. He is going against the government of God, again, we can see here. Let us continue and see how he sinned. As we saw that he was a perfect created being that chose to sin. This is important. God did not create the devil. God created a perfect being with a perfect free will, and we will talk more about free will. His name was Lucifer, but he misused his free will to go against his own creator. There was no reason for him to do it, but still he did it. We could see that he was jealous of God. Let us go back to Ezekiel chapter 28 and verse 17 and 18. Here we'll read what was his original sin. What was the sin of the devil? Here we read, "Thine heart was lifted up because of thy beauty. Thou hast corrupted thy wisdom by reason of thy brightness. I will cast thee to the ground. I will lay thee before kings, that they may behold thee." Again, this is future, talking about future, what will happen to him, a prophecy. "Thou hast defiled thy sanctuaries by the multitude of thy iniquities, by the iniquity of thy traffic. Therefore will I bring forth a fire from the midst of thee, it shall devour thee, and I will bring thee to ashes upon the earth in the sight of all of them that behold thee." We read that eventually he will be destroyed. It has not happened yet. This is a prophecy still. But we read about what is this sin that he's doing? How is it described here according to these verses? We see this word repeated over and over again. Merchandise, trafficking, that by the iniquity of thy traffic. What is all this talking about? What was Lucifer selling in heaven? What was he trafficking there? What could it be? I think we'll find the question. If you actually look into the root word of this word, trafficking, or traffic, or merchandise, you'll see you can find the root word in two other places where it gives a really clear meaning of what it means. Let us go to Leviticus chapter 19 and verse 16. There we find the same root word that describes this traffic or this selling. Here in Leviticus chapter 19 verse 16 we read, "Thou shalt not go up and down as and here comes the word, talebearer among thy people, neither shalt thou stand against the blood of thy neighbor. I am the Lord." This word, talebearer, what does this mean? What is a talebearer? Someone who makes up stories. Someone who talks lies, right? Or slanders. Another place where we find the same root word, it is in Ezekiel chapter 13 verse 22. There it's translated, "Because with lies ye have made the heart of the righteous sad." Again, we can see what Lucifer was trafficking, what he was selling was lies in heaven. What do you think all these lies were about? What did Lucifer lie, or what did Lucifer sell? And I actually forgot to mention, we even have this expression both in English and in Swedish, that if you try to sell a lie to someone, you tell them, "No, I don't buy it." Have you seen, we have the exact same expressions. We don't buy the lies, right? So if someone sells lies to us, we don't want to buy them, right? What was he lying about? What do you think Lucifer could have lied about in heaven?
Lie about the character of God.
God, right? That was his motive. He wanted to go against him. He would lie about the character of God, his government, his law. Let us see what Jesus says. He says something very interesting about the very original sin of Satan. Because in John chapter 8, verse 44, we read, "Ye are of your father the devil." He's talking to the Pharisees here. That says that we are children of God, but they are trying to kill Jesus. But he says that, "Ye are of your father the devil, and the lust of your father he will do. He was a murderer from the beginning." Just a question. How was Lucifer a murderer from the beginning? Do we actually read that he killed someone? Not really, right?
But he tell a lie.
But according to the Bible, to murder someone, according to Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount. He says, to murder someone is to hate your brother without a cause. He hated God without a cause. And in that sense, he was a murderer from the beginning. He had killed him in his heart, and abode not in the truth, because there is no truth in him. And look upon what's written here next. When he speaketh a lie, he speaketh of his own, for he is a liar and the father of it. He was the one that originated the lies about God and about his character. And let us continue a little bit more. We can really confirm this from the Bible. If we go to Revelation chapter 12, where we have a description of how the past of how this great controversy started. Remember, the book of Revelation is not only about future, it also gives information of the past that is important to understand the rest of the book of Revelation. If we go to Revelation chapter 12, the book of Revelation chapter 12, verse 3 and 4, we read about this falling from heaven that happened in the past. There we read, and there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and seven crowns upon his head. Pay attention to these details now. And his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. We read here about, we get a description of a great red dragon that drew a third of the stars of heaven with his tail. Do we know what this represents? We'll get the answer later in the explanation in Revelation chapter 12, verse 7 and 9. Who is this dragon? We read about verse 7. And there was war in heaven. Can you imagine this? We usually don't think about war in heaven, right? We think of heaven as a peaceful place. But here, we read about a war in heaven. Do you think they fought with swords or with, laser beams, some kind of futuristic weapons? Wouldn't make sense, right? This word war, if you read it in the Greek, the word is polemos, which is actually the word where we get the word polemics from, like fighting with words. This is what the war is all about. It's a war of ideas. We have two sides. We have Michael and his angels, and we will study who Michael is, but we can see that he's on the good side. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels. Two different camps fighting about ideas, fighting about how to govern. And prevailed not, neither was their place found any more in heaven. And the great dragon was cast out, again we read this word cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan. So who is this great dragon? Devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and who was cast out with him? And his angels were cast out with him to the earth, right? Do you remember what was written before? It was written that the dragon took a third of the stars down to earth. Later we see the explanation. These stars are the angels. It means that he deceived a third of the angels. But pay attention. How did he take them down? How did he take a third of the angels down with him, according to Revelation chapter 12 and verse 4? With what did he take him? It says, and his tail drew the third part of the stars. What does a tail represent in the Bible? You think we might have a verse for that? Let's go to Isaiah chapter 9, verse 15. There we see what a tail represents. There we read Isaiah chapter 9, verse 15. The ancient and honorable, he is the head. And the prophet that teacheth lies, he is the tail. A tail in the Bible represents lies. So this dragon, the tail of the dragon, are the lies. He's sweeping away a third of the population of heaven, a third of the stars. He is spreading lies to the angels. Telling lies about who God really is. Starting to sneak out and show his disapproval of the government of God. A third were deceived, right? And why do you think? Why would God allow this to happen? Why didn't he just destroy the devil? When he realizes, oh, Lucifer, oh my, what are you thinking? And then just poof, gone away. Could God do that?
Yes, he can, but he loved him.
So, in a sense, he can and he has the power, but he would not do that. And why wouldn't he do that? Would that solve the issue? Would that solve the problem with sin?
He showed him for his love.
So because God gives freedom to these beings, even the angels have freedom, you cannot force love, right? I cannot put a gun to your, I can put a gun to your head and make you give me your wallet, right? You would give it if you had a gun on your head, would you? But if I would put a gun on your head and tell you to love me, could you do that? Love cannot be forced. And the same in the government of God. His throne is based upon love. He will not lie, he will not deceive. But this is what Satan will do. And with these lies about, we can even see what lies he had about God. When we look into the temptation of Adam and Eve, or especially Eve, we can see that he is telling Eve that this fruit represented when you look upon the first temptation that Eve faced, you can see the very lies of Satan. He says that God is keeping something good from you. That's why you can't eat from this tree, because you will become like God. God is selfish. He's a dictator. He only wants to serve himself. He created us just for us to serve him. This is his argument, that God is a selfish God, and I can govern better. But then comes the question, how would God solve this? Because if someone tells lies about your character, if God would just bring all the angels to him and expose the lies of Satan, can he just say that, yeah, Satan is wrong? Would that be enough? When someone calls you a liar, is it enough for you to say, no, I'm not? If you would call me a liar, and I would say, no, I'm not, would you be satisfied with the answer? Right. I mean, you cannot just tell people that you're not a liar, because you would just tell, do you see, he's lying again? And then we have this back and forth. In order for God to resolve this, to really show what his government is about, it was not only enough with words, but there was necessary for a practical demonstration to really show the character of God. You cannot just say it. And we have a prophecy in Isaiah chapter 56 and verse 1. Thus said the Lord, keep ye judgment and do justice, for my salvation is near to come, and my righteousness to be revealed. So, all these lies, the only remedy for it is to reveal the truth, to reveal the true character. And that's what I mean, it has to grow. When sin has started, you couldn't just destroy the originator of sin, because the seed had already started to grow. And if you would destroy it there and then, everyone would have questions. If God would have destroyed Lucifer there and then, Well, do you think the angels would serve him out of love? They would have thought that, oh, as soon as somebody has question and goes against the government of God, we are nuked. That's not how he could solve this. He had to let it play out and to mature for the world and the angels to see eventually the difference between righteousness and sin. Let us go to the very answer, how God would show his righteousness, how he would reveal his character. Romans chapter 1, verse 16 and 17, we read there, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation to everyone that believeth, to the Jew first and also to the Greek." Pay attention to verse 17 here. "For therein," that means in the gospel, "is the righteousness of God revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the just shall live by faith." When you reveal something, does it mean that you created something new? No, right. Just show what was already there along, that people couldn't see it. And we see that it was in the gospel that the love of God and the character of God was revealed. And we could see the true nature of who Satan was. If we just read also in 1 John chapter 3 and verse 8, we read something interesting there. And we'll study this more the next time. Here it says that he that committed sin is of the devil. For the devil sinned from the beginning. So let's see, what was the purpose that Jesus came? For this purpose, the Son of God was manifested that he might destroy what? The works of the devil. And what we studied so far, what is the works of the devil? It is his lies about God. And Jesus, he comes to reveal the true character of God, to destroy the lies of Satan. And how would he do it? The great charge against the throne of God was that he's selfish. He's keeping good things from us for himself, and we are just forced obedient servants. But is this the foundation of God's throne? God says his foundation is self-sacrificing love, right? Let us read Philippians chapter 2, verse 5 to 8, and we will end with two verses here now. And remember, this is in contrast to Isaiah chapter 14, when Lucifer says that I will ascend to the heavens. I will become like God. I will set up my throne. Here we read something else. He just wanted to go higher and higher and higher. But let's look upon the character of Jesus. "Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, who being in the form of God, thought it not robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation, and took upon him the form of a servant, and was made in the likeness of men. And being found in fashion as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient unto death, even the death of the cross." Here we read about the character of God. He would go lower and lower and sacrifice himself. He would die for his creation. This is what is demonstrated upon the cross. And we will especially study it next time when we will study the theme of God on trial. It's the second part of this great cosmic conflict that we will study in 2 sessions. But here we can see that he truly showed, and we'll go into details what it really means, that he would actually give his life for his own created beings. But do you remember that even angels had questions, right? They are interested in looking upon what is happening on earth. There on the cross, as we'll study next time, Jesus, he demonstrated even to the angels, to the worlds, that God's way of governing the universe is the just one. And you could see the principles of Satan. Again, as we read in the beginning, the wheat and the tare had to grow up and mature. When it's a lot of lies involved, you're confused. You don't know what is right, what is wrong. Maybe some of the ideas of Satan seemed very, very convincing. But we saw the end result in the end. But I want to finish with this verse. This is the last verse that we read here. And this is what I want you to take away with you for the rest of your life, actually. That what is happening here on earth, it's not only the interest of earth. It's much greater things at stake. If we go to 1 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 9, we read that, "For I think that God had set forth us, the apostle last, as it were appointed to death, for we are made a spectacle unto the world, and to angels, and to men." What Paul is saying here, this word here, spectacle, is the word theatros, a great theater. He says that we, on this planet Earth, we are a spectacle to the whole universe, both to men and of angels, and they are looking with interest what is happening right here, because we humans, we have not yet decided which side we will take in this great conflict, the controversy, if we are going to stay with God or with Satan. And the whole universe is interested to see what you will choose. And my question to you today is that, would you choose to stay on God's side? Can you imagine when you live your day, the whole universe is interested in what choices you will take, if you will follow the ways of God or the ways of Satan? I mean, the days become so much more exciting if you could imagine that everything matters. All the things I do are of great interest to the whole universe. And next time, as I said, we will study more. We see that the conflict has ended and stayed here on earth, and it will develop here. And this is what the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation is all about, to reveal what is happening behind the curtains. And we'll see how it started here, how it will continue, and how it will eventually finish here on earth. But let us end with a word of prayer, and let us bow our heads. Father in heaven, we just want to thank you so much for this clear description you have given us in the Bible of how this great conflict has started, and that we can see that your character was always right, and your way of governing it is truly the just way. We can see that you will give your own life for us. How can we not trust a God like that? And I really ask that all those doubts and all those fears, or all the misconceptions and lies we have heard about you, that throughout this series that they will vanish, and we might again truly see that you are a God worth knowing. And this we pray